Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, as the firelight flickers and time slows for just a moment, I want to tell you a story that may feel eerily familiar. It's not just about two boys who grew up together. It's about something that lives quietly in all of us. The way we treat our parents, and how that echo, whether warm or cold, returns to us through our children's voices. What if the way you speak to your parents now is exactly how your child will speak to you someday? What if love or neglect is inherited, not by blood, but by example? It was the spring of 1959 in Fremont, Ohio, a quiet town where church bells rang at noon and the sweet scent of fresh pies drifted through open windows. It's where 10-year-olds David and Clyde first became best friends. They lived just 2 houses apart on Mulberry Lane. David's father was a mailman, steady and reliable. His mother baked cookies for the whole block. Clyde's dad owned a hardware store, and his mother, Marlene, loved to dance to Patsy Cline records while mopping the floor. From the outside, both homes seemed happy, but if you looked a little closer, you'd notice something small, but important. David always stopped when his mom called. "Yes, Ma?" he'd say, setting down his toy train or pausing a game of marbles. He never forgot to kiss his dad on the cheek before bed. Clyde was different. When his mother asked for help, he'd pretend not to hear. He'd groan at chores, roll his eyes when his dad called him in from playing. He loved them, sure, but he treated their attention like a nuisance, like something he deserved, but didn't have to return. By the time they reached high school in 1963, their friendship had grown stronger. They played football together, went to sock hops, got caught sneaking out once, and blamed it on each other, laughing the whole way through detention. But while David still sat with his parents at dinner every night, Clyde often skipped meals, holed up in his room with the radio turned loud. David's mom would smile gently whenever Clyde came over. "You're always welcome here," she'd say, and sometimes she looked at him the way she looked at David. One night, as they lay on the grass counting stars, David said quietly, "You ever think your folks are lonely, Clyde?" Clyde scoffed, "They've got each other." David didn't argue. He just stared at the sky and wondered why it made his chest ache. Graduation came in 1967. The Vietnam War raged on, but they both got deferments for college. They packed their things and left Fremont behind, off to the University of Dayton. They were roommates in a cramped little apartment with yellow walls, leaky faucets, and one squeaky twin bed. They took turns fixing every weekend. Still, they were happy. David called his parents every Sunday, wrote letters with little updates. Got a B+ in biology, missing Ma's stew. Clyde, he didn't write, he didn't call. When David reminded him, Clyde would grunt, "They know I'm fine. If something's wrong, they'll call me." One afternoon, David picked up the phone and passed it to Clyde. "It's your mum," he said softly. "She said she hasn't heard from you in 6 months." Clyde rolled his eyes and took the receiver. "What, Ma? I'm busy." David quietly stepped outside. By the summer of 1971, college was behind them. They tossed their caps took grainy Polaroids, and promised to never lose touch. Life, as it tends to do, swept them into new chapters. David got a job teaching middle school in Columbus. He rented a modest apartment, bought a beat-up Dodge Dart, and visited Fremont every other weekend to help his parents around the house, repainting fences, fixing screen doors, trimming hedges. Clyde moved to Cincinnati and started a sales job. Flashier life, bigger paycheck. He didn't call home unless it was Christmas, or if he needed something signed or notarized. One December, Marlene sent Clyde a letter. "We miss hearing your voice," she wrote in looping cursive. "Your dad's been walking slower lately." Clyde tossed it on the counter and muttered, "He always walked slow." David, meanwhile, bought a rotary phone for his kitchen wall and called his mom every Sunday after church. In 1974, David met Linda, a bookshop clerk with kind eyes and a soft laugh. She loved kids, baked cinnamon rolls from scratch, and believed in handwritten notes. They married in 1975 and bought a small home on Elm Street. The same year, Clyde called David with exciting news. He was marrying a woman named Roxanne, fiery, ambitious, always moving. "She keeps me on my toes," Clyde laughed. David smiled and replied, "That's a good thing." Their weddings were only 6 months apart. David's reception had polka dancing and potluck pies. Clyde's was at a hotel ballroom, all velvet and jazz. But by the end of both nights, each man found his best friend and said the same thing. We're grown-ups now. The late 1970s brought diapers and lullabies. David and Linda had a daughter named Susan in 1978, followed by a boy named Carl in 81. He built tree houses, made pancakes shaped like teddy bears, and took them every Sunday to visit Grandma and Grandpa in Fremont. Clyde and Roxanne had a son, Ethan, in 1980, then another, Grant, in 83. They hired nannies, took vacations, and sent birthday cards to Marlene and Earl, but rarely visited. One Christmas, Clyde's mother sent a box of hand-knitted sweaters for the boys. No thank you call ever came. David noticed. So did Marlene. In 1986, Clyde's father, Earl, fell ill with liver complications. He was admitted to a small hospital outside Fremont. Marlene called, her voice shaking. "He's asking for you," she said. Clyde replied, "I've got meetings all week. Tell him I'll visit next month." But Earl didn't make it to next month. At the funeral, Clyde stood stiff beside the casket. His sons fidgeted. Roxanne scrolled through her calendar. Marlene sat in silence, her hand cold in David's. After the service, David and Clyde stood by the parking lot. "You could have come sooner," David said, not accusing, just stating. Clyde lit a cigarette. "Didn't think it was that serious." David stared at the gravel, his voice quiet. It was always serious, he just didn't say it. Years passed. Susan and Carl thrived. School plays, soccer trophies, family road trips. They called their grandparents weekly, sometimes just to say, "I love you." Ethan and Grant, they grew tall, smart, independent. But when Marlene called, they rarely answered. Birthdays were often forgotten, and when Marlene passed, in 1993, Ethan couldn't make the funeral. "I've got finals," he said. "She wouldn't want me to mess that up." Clyde nodded. "It's fine." She understood. But something in his voice cracked. Something too late to change. By the mid-1990s, the children were nearly grown. Susan enrolled in nursing school in Cleveland. Carl joined the Navy. They wrote letters to their grandparents, even from base and dorm rooms. David's phone rang every Sunday night. One call from Susan, another from Carl. Sometimes they didn't say much, but they always said, "I miss you, Dad." David saved every voicemail. Clyde's sons were different. Ethan attended business school in Chicago. Grant studied film in California. Clyde paid their tuition, bought them cars, and reminded them to be strong. But the phone at his house was quiet. No calls on Father's Day, no letters. Sometimes he'd ask Roxanne, "Did Ethan ever mention if he got the birthday card I sent?" She'd sigh, "Maybe he's just busy." But Clyde remembered a time when Marlene had said the same thing about him. And now, when silence came, he couldn't pretend not to hear it. In 2004, David retired from teaching. His students, now grown, threw him a surprise celebration in the school gym. Susan flew in with her daughter Megan, and Carl drove overnight with his two boys, still in their pajamas, to surprise Grandpa Dave. That night, as they all sat around the fireplace, Megan curled up in David's lap and asked, "Can we come back next weekend too?" David smiled, eyes glassy. "You can come every weekend, baby." In the same week, Clyde also retired. There was no party, no visitors. Roxanne was at a spa retreat. Ethan didn't respond to the retirement announcement Clyde emailed out. Grant sent a gift basket. No note. Clyde opened the fridge, took out a single beer, and stood at the back door, staring at the old swing set he never took down. A year later, in 2005, David's health began to decline. Nothing too dramatic, just high blood pressure, stiff joints, and the usual reminders of time's passing. But his children noticed. Carl called more often. Susan began dropping off meals, fussing about sodium levels. His grandchildren took turns mowing the lawn. One afternoon, while Megan helped fold laundry, she said, "You know, Grandpa, Mommy always says you're her hero." David chuckled. "She's mine too." Outside the window, a robin landed near the porch swing. David watched it and whispered to himself, "God's good." In contrast, Clyde's house was getting quieter. The phone rang less. Roxanne traveled more. Grant was working on a documentary abroad. Ethan had moved to New York City and barely returned texts. One night, Clyde scrolled through old photos. A picture of Marlene popped up. She was holding his face, smiling. He remembered being annoyed that day. She had asked him 3 times to fix the porch railing, and he had snapped, "Can't you stop asking me for things?" Now, he would have given anything to hear her voice again. One rainy Thursday in 2008, Clyde drove to Fremont. He parked across from David's old house, his childhood home. He didn't knock, he just sat in the car, staring at the porch swing, remembering bike races and peanut butter sandwiches. He pulled out his phone, opened Ethan's contact, and stared at it for a long time. Then he dialed. It rang 6 times. No answer. Clyde placed the phone on the passenger seat and whispered, "Now I know how it feels." In 2010, Susan and Carl organized a family reunion in Fremont. Dozens came, old cousins, neighbors, even David's former students, now with gray hair and grandkids of their own. They held it in the backyard of David's home, now with a freshly painted deck and new garden beds Carl built himself. When David stepped outside using a cane, but still smiling like it was 1962, everyone stood and clapped. Tears welled in his eyes. Susan gave a toast. To the man who never missed a birthday, who taught us how to treat people by how he treated his own parents. Thank you, Dad. We are who we are because of you. That night, as the stars came out and children chased fireflies, David leaned toward Carl. "You know," he said, "there were times I wondered if all those little things mattered." Carl rested a hand on his shoulder. "They mattered, Dad. They built everything." Back in Cincinnati, Clyde sat on his porch, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The house was too quiet. He hadn't heard from Ethan in over a year. Grant sent postcards from Morocco and Spain, but never called. Roxanne spent more time in Florida now, saying the winters were too hard on her knees. She invited Clyde to come along, but he always said no. One day, he decided to call Grant. "I was just thinking of you," Clyde said. "Would love to catch up." There was a pause. Grant's voice came through the static. "Now's not a good time, Dad. Can I call you later?" Clyde waited for that call. It never came. In 2015, David's heart began to fail. He was placed on medication, had a nurse visit twice a week, and spent most of his days sitting near the window, listening to old radio shows. Susan moved in temporarily. Carl built a ramp outside for easier access. His grandchildren brought coloring books and stories from school. Every Sunday, someone brought him church bulletins. Someone prayed beside his bed. He never felt alone. And every night before sleep, he whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for all of it." In 2018, Clyde suffered a mild stroke. He was lucky, recovered quickly, but it left him slower. He walked with a limp and found himself forgetting words sometimes. No one visited him at the hospital. Not Ethan, not Grant, not even Roxanne, who sent a nurse with a fruit basket and a signed card. Clyde sat in the hospital bed, chewing on unsweetened Jell-O, and stared at the beige wall for hours. He thought of Earl, of Marlene, of all the calls he didn't return, the thank yous he never said, and for the first time in his life, he whispered a prayer. "God, I think I understand now." Later that year, he drove very slowly to Fremont. No announcement, no reason. He just needed to see his old friend. David greeted him with a warm smile and a tired hug. They sat on the porch, Two old men watching the world slow down with them. Do you ever think about the past? Clyde asked. David nodded. All the time. Think we got it right? David smiled, not smug, just peaceful. I don't know about right, but I do know I tried. Clyde's eyes welled up. I didn't. Not enough. David placed a hand on his shoulder. Then try now. The next year, in 2019, Clyde began trying. He mailed a long letter to Ethan. A real letter, handwritten, not an email, not a text. Son, I haven't been the best father. I see that now, but I want to be better, if you'll let me. I miss your voice. I miss your laugh. And I'm sorry I didn't give you more of mine when it mattered. He sealed it, sent it, waited. No reply. He sent another to Grant. I watched your documentary online. You're brilliant. I don't think I ever told you that. I'm proud of you, son. Still. Silence. But Clyde didn't stop. He began volunteering at a local community center, brought food to elderly neighbors, attended church for the first time in decades. He spoke to David more often, over coffee, porch visits, quiet drives past the old high school. You're becoming someone new, David once said. Clyde shook his head. I'm becoming someone I should have been all along. In 2021, David passed peacefully in his sleep. Susan and Carl were both at his side. His last words were barely a whisper. Love. It comes back. Always. The funeral was held on a clear spring day. Hundreds came. Former students, grandchildren, friends, the mayor, even the man who used to deliver his groceries, saying, he always asked how my mother was doing. Carl read a passage from Psalms. Susan spoke through tears. Megan sang a hymn so softly it made the pastor cry. Clyde sat in the back row. He didn't speak, but when everyone had left, he walked up to the casket and placed a note beneath David's folded hands. It read, "Thank you for showing me what it means to be a father. I'm still learning." Later that year, Ethan called. Just once. "Got your letters," he said. Clyde's voice shook. "And?" "I'm not ready to talk about the past, but I'd like to meet for lunch sometime." Clyde closed his eyes. "I'd like that." It took another 6 months, but they met. At a quiet diner off Route 68, over coffee and pie. They didn't talk about wounds. They talked about movies, about the weather, about nothing. But when they stood to leave, Ethan put his hand on Clyde's shoulder and said, "I'm proud of you too, Dad." Grant visited the following Christmas. He brought a camera and asked Clyde if he'd be willing to be interviewed. "Why me?" Clyde asked. Grant smiled. "Because I want to make a film about second chances, and you're it." In the spring of 2023, the lilacs in Fremont bloomed early. Clyde, now 80, moved slowly but with purpose. He kept a garden now, nothing fancy. Just a few tomatoes, some rosemary, and the satisfaction of dirt beneath his fingernails. Ethan called every Sunday. Grant visited when he could. Neither relationship was perfect, but it was real. One sunny afternoon, Clyde sat on a bench in the town's square. A young father nearby was scolding his son for ignoring his grandmother's phone call. Clyde leaned over and said gently, "She won't always be around. One day you'll wish you answered." The father looked at him and nodded slowly. "I'll call her back." Clyde smiled. He had become the echo he never used to hear. In late 2024, Grant's documentary was released online. It was titled The Quiet Return, a story of fatherhood, regret, healing, and grace. In one scene, Clyde said to the camera, "You don't raise children by telling them what to do. You raise them by how you treat your own parents. I learned that too late, but thank God, not too late to pass it on." Now, dear listener, as our fire begins to dim and the room grows still, I ask you, how do you speak to your mother? Do you answer your father's calls? Do you show up, even when it's inconvenient? Because one day, your child will do the same, and whether it comes back as warmth or silence will depend on the choices you make today. David lived a life that echoed with love. Clyde, in the end, learned how to turn his own echo into something redemptive. We all can. It's never too late to change what we pass on. If the story touched your heart and you would like to listen to more like it, you know where to find us.